Today, I want to share with you the inspiration behind my story. I remember in my 20s, I was going through a lot. It was, those stages where you're questioning so much. I was questioning so much that had happened to me. Why did this happen? And couldn't get the answers and just going through a lot. So, anyway, I would frequent the club. I wasn't in the church at the time. I would frequent the club and going to the club, and so much would happen. So much random things will happen, and it had me questioning. Like, I felt I felt protected. I felt like somebody or something was protecting me, whether it was somebody who got shot next to me or an accident I got into. But anyway, my life was spared. And so one night I was leaving the club, and a voice said to me, "You're a walking book. Your life is a walking book. One day you will write a book." And at the time, I really didn't entertain it. I was a high school dropout, a single mother of two children. And not only that, but struggled to comprehend what I was reading. And so writing a book was very, very far from my mind. How could this thing be, right? And so as life continued, I went on surviving and doing the best I could. There were times where I couldn't even help my children with their homework. And that's how life was a little bit challenging and having to navigate through. But as I progressed, I think it was in my mid 30s, um, that I really decided to challenge myself to read and to really go back to what I knew about myself as a little girl. So before, trauma happened to me, I was a reader, I was a writer, I write little stories, I would perform, in church and different things. And so it's something about when you know, it's something about when you know what you're capable of, it's something about knowing. And because of that knowing, it challenged me to get back to that place. And so I realized that I needed to do something. And one of the things I decided to do was to start reading. I wanted to challenge myself to overcome the barrier, overcome the fear, and overcome the anger of, losing a passion for reading and losing that zeal and that zest for learning. And so I started to read in these books. And as I was reading these books and really trying to understand what they were saying, namely memoirs, I realized that the books I was reading, they didn't speak to my story. They didn't speak to a Caribbean life experience. They didn't speak in a language that I could relate to, right? And I started to saying, there's something missing. There's something missing. I need to write, and I need to find a book that I could relate to. And so I decided that I'm going to write my story. I want to write a story because I think I was thinking about, well, first I wanted to get all the past out my head. I wanted to write it and to speak to someone who would listen. And so when I started writing, it was my papers that were listening to what I had gone through. And so um as I started writing, it was very painful. It was painful to relive the past. It was painful to having to relive it and to feel the pain. All of that, you're re-earthing it, you're remembering, and you're having to relive it, to write it on paper. Like, many times I got up from the laptop and I'm just like, I can't do this. But what I realized in the same breath, there was this joy of finally finding a way to release my anger, release my experience. I found an avenue and it became so amazing. So anyway, so there was this bittersweet moment of, having to relive and rehash the past, but it's also the joy of finally freeing myself from these thoughts in my head, and the things and the burden of holding on to so much. So there was so much during that time, and not only that, I'm writing, but I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm just emptying out my mind. I won't even tell you how many pages I wrote, right, in my laptop. But anyway, I know that um I was writing a story only I can tell. I couldn't allow other people to tell my story. I couldn't allow the voices that were speaking to speak for me. I had to write my own story. I had to tell my version the way how I experienced it, right? And so I was writing for my inner child. I was advocating for myself, right? For that child who couldn't speak up, who wasn't given a voice to say, what happened to you? Tell me what happened to you, right? So I decided to give myself that voice, and I decided to listen to myself and to vent and to speak. So I was writing for my inner child, and it felt so good. It felt cathartic. It felt so good to release it and finally have an avenue, a way to speak and express what happened to me. And I also write for other people who wanted to find someone to share what they have been through, that they can say, wow, I've been through that too. And as I said, I started reading these books. There's so many books I was reading, and I was like, this don't resonate. But it was long after I found books like Ugly. I think her name is Briscoe, last name Briscoe. She's a Jamaican author out of Britain. And when I read her story, I was like, oh my God, like I finally found someone that had that language, that had that story, that had that experience to help validate why I was doing what I was doing. But that was long after the process I've already been through, right? But I really wanted to add to that conversation, to add to share what has happened to me, that somebody else can get the hope they need, right? And so I was also writing from my adult self, namely because at this stage, in my early 40s, at that point, I started to realize that God had more in store for me. And I could not grab a hold or to really take by faith what God was revealing to me if I was still holding on to the past. And so it was a way to really release that baton and to go into something greater, to go into something so much more promising, a purpose. And it's amazing because, as I said, I knew who I was before trauma happened. And so I find it very ironic, though, how as a child I would write, as a child I would perform on stage, as a child I did all those things. But I first found it very interesting how God gave me a story, but He also gave me the ability, and that's what really inspires me and excites me at the same time, to see that even while I was going through everything, God was still there. He's the one that orchestrates everything, just the fact of giving me the ability to tell my own story, and to also show me that what happened to me didn't define me. I knew who I was before trauma happened. I just think it's the greatest love story, the greatest love story from a father to a daughter. So I'm very, very humble. I'm very grateful to see where God had what God has done with my life, you know. And so I do hope that my story inspires others. I hope that it gives hope. And I am even more so excited because the story continues. You know, just yesterday I got accepted into the master's program. So I'll be going back for my master's degree next year, you know, and it's just to see that it's not just about, you know, the trauma we experience, but it's for God to heal that place, heal that trauma, so we can be restored, we can be renewed, and we can be transformed. So here I am just having such a passion and a zeal for learning, a zeal and a passion to help others, and that God has given me a way to do that. So I am very humble. I'm very delighted. I am delighted to see what God is doing in my life. And as I said, the story continues. So look forward to more. I'll be sharing more. But just thank you so much for your purchase. If you haven't yet, this is my memoir here. Mumzai, Trapped in the Mind of a Child. Mumzai, Trapped in the Mind of a Child is available on Amazon. So for those of you who have already purchased it, thank you. And I just ask that you go out, write a review, and support my mission here to tell my story, to share my story in a real and honest way, to give a voice to others, to encourage you, and to let you know there's life beyond trauma. There's life beyond healing, and that God has a plan. I know with every fiber in my being that God has a plan for each and every one of us. So I pray that you have a blessed day. I pray that you just be filled with hope that your best is still yet to come. Thank you, and thanks for watching.